This is part 3 of what's turned into a video series about my 3x to 1x conversion on my giant ATX 27.5 mountain bike. Based on my riding impressions and also considering some of the comments some viewers have given, I've decided to go with even lower gearing with the 30-tooth sprocket in the front, as some have suggested. And I also want to go back and do as many of the bolts with the proper torque that I can, again based on a lot of feedback from viewers, which I appreciate. Some of the bolts that I plan to torque properly would be for the cassette, the derailleur bolt, the sprocket mounting bolts, and the crank itself, which is of course secured on the other side. I think I've used too many plastic washers on the crank, and so I'd like to remove a couple of those, hopefully get better overlap of the non-drive side crank arm onto the spindle. And pedals, torquing the pedals properly. So let's get to it. First step is torquing the rear cassette properly. Okay, so we're going to start with torquing the cassette. It states right on here that you need to lock it at 40 Newton meters. So I've got my little Amazon lock ring tool here, and I've got a torque wrench that's got a range that's much higher than most bicycle bolts, except in this case this is pretty high torque compared to most things found on a bicycle. This type of torque wrench, it actually gives a little bit. The head and the handle give when you hit the proper torque. There we go. So with the rear cassette torqued, the next thing I want to do is swap out the chainring. This is the 30 tooth that I got. This is the 32 tooth that came with the crank, which gives really good gearing ratio for me with the 1x12. But I want to go even lower. I want to take the whole range lower, make it easier for climbing. So I got this JG bike front chainring, 30 tooth. So here it is. It comes with 5 bolts. This one's a little bit different than the one that I got with the IXF crank. This one had bolts and nuts that connect to each other, so there's just straight holes drilled in the chainring itself. This JG bike chainring is actually threaded in the holes here, so there's only bolts that go with it to connect right in there. The other thing that's a little bit different about this chainring is these little raised areas. I believe that's because a 30-tooth chainring is really pushing the boundaries of what this 104 BCD chainring can accommodate. And so they've had to offset it slightly. So it looks like it's about 1.5 millimeters further inset. So it's going to change the chain line a little bit. I'm hoping it's not going to be significant. It shouldn't be a problem. This may not fit over the pedal, and it's looking like it will not. So instead of removing the drive side pedal to get the chainring off, I'm going to be taking the bottom bracket apart anyways to torque it properly, or at least as close as I can. And so I'm going to take off the non-drive side arm and do all that, and in the process, when I take the crank out, the chainring will come off. So first, to loosen crank arm bolts. So just before I remove the non-drive side crank arm, I just want to take a close-up look here at the bottom bracket and the crank. Currently on the drive side, I've got one washer installed. The IXF crank came with 3, and I've got 2 installed on the non-drive side. I wasn't really aware of what I should be putting there. And what I probably should have noticed though is you can see the non-drive side crank arm is not going fully onto the spindle. And so that doesn't look right to me in hindsight. After doing a little reading online, it seems that when you have a 73mm wide bottom bracket, you don't need to have these washers here at all. So I'm planning to remove those, and that'll get me that thickness taken up here by the crank arm covering the spindle further. Okay, let's remove that. Make sure to keep that little washer ring. Put it back in the arm. Okay, there's the crank and the spindle off. Forgotten just how light this is. Super lightweight. Just recalling that each side of the bottom bracket spins in an opposite direction. So there's an arrow on the top here, right next to the torque value. That indicates that I have to tighten it to the right, clockwise. And so I'm going to be loosening it counterclockwise. Because I don't have a socket that fits over this, I only have this tool. Unfortunately, I can't measure the torque accurately on this. The only thing I have to go by is my experience with tightening the cassette to get a feel for how tight it is. And of course, because this is shorter, I'd have to apply significantly more force than that. The longer the lever arm is, the less force you have to apply to achieve the same torque, that is. So I'm going to try to do this by hand, and then if it doesn't seem reasonable to get it tight enough, I'm going to try putting an extension tube on here to see if I can give myself more leverage. That works really well. It's just a piece of about 2-inch ABS that happens to fit the handle well enough to be able to give me some more leverage. So while the crank is off, this is my chance to take off the chainring without having to take the pedal off. Okay, so here's the new chainring. 30 tooth. Looks like there's a dot right here stamped into the chainring to let me know where the crank arm should be. So as mentioned, these holes are threaded on this chainring, and as you can see, the crank, it actually overlaps where the chain needs to go, and that's why this is the smallest size chainring you can fit, that I'm aware of anyways, on this type of crank. It has put an extra 1.5 millimeters of offset from where the old chainring was mounted. This JG Bike chainring did come with 5 screws. I think I mentioned that earlier. It turns out the screws that I had for the old chainring fit just fine, so I could have just reused those if I chose to. These are steel screws going into an aluminum chainring, so cross-threading is a concern. So you want to make sure you get it in there nice and straight, or it'll be easy to rip apart those aluminum threads on the chainring. Looking online, I could find some sources that said that you should apply some thread locker, like Loctite, to these threads. The only option there would be to use blue Loctite, which is like a medium strength. You wouldn't want to put red on here. That's like a permanent connection. I found other sources that said that that's not a good idea. If you torque it to the right setting, then it should be fine. I'm going to not use thread locker. I'm just going to torque these and see how it goes. So I'm going to torque these once I have it on the bike. It would be a little too awkward to do just by hand right now. Although I could do it, but it'll be easier on the bike. So I'm going to apply a little more grease. Always a good idea to put some fresh grease on when you can. The grease looks really good. It doesn't look dirty or anything, so I'll just apply a little more grease. Just before I put the crank on, I'm just going to torque the other side of the bottom bracket. This arrow is pointing down on this side, so that means counterclockwise. That'll look backwards from the camera's perspective. But for me, counterclockwise on the drive side is to tighten. All right, so I'm glad I tightened up the drive side because it seemed a little bit loose. So now I can go ahead and put my greased up crank back in. This black plastic ring on the bottom bracket, it protects the bearings, and it tends to, when you push this through, it tends to pop it out. So it's a good idea to hold on to that plastic ring as you get the crank seated all the way in. Okay, let's see what kind of overlap we get here now. Of course, I think it goes without saying that you want to get the crank arms 180 degrees away from each other. There's wide slots on the spindle that match up so that you can only fit it either completely in line with each other or 180 degrees away from each other. So as you can see, the overlap there is now excellent. So when I tighten this down, I'll have no concerns about the amount of overlap between the spindle and the crank arm. Thanks to a viewer of part 1 of this video series that made a comment on the video. This black plastic plug that fits in the end, it's just to capture the crank arm on with enough tension when you tighten the other bolts that actually secure it. There is a torque rating right on this bolt. It says 0.7 to 1.5 Newton meters. So I'm going to secure that on there using that torque. Something I haven't mentioned to this point is I didn't have a torque wrench that would work for bike torques, which are quite low. I only had a larger torque wrench that starts at 10 foot-pounds, which that's got to be about 13 to 15 Newton meters, something like that. I looked online. I wasn't really thrilled about paying from Amazon $30 Canadian or so for something like this. So I found one at a local automotive store, Princess Auto here in Canada. And it was on sale for $12, $13, something like that. It goes from 0 Newton meters to 9. So it'll work for a lot of things, but it leaves me with a little bit of a gap because my larger torque wrench starts higher than 9. So I'll just have to work around that. But in this case, this should be great for doing up to 1.5 Newton meters. Not very much, 1.5. So that was a 10 millimeter Allen key or hex key required there. For these bolts, it's a 5 millimeter. These bolts came from the factory with some blue Loctite on them. So the torque rating for these bolts is 12 Newton meters. As mentioned, my little torque wrench only goes up to 9, so I'm going to have to go by feel on this. My bigger torque wrench starts at 10 pound-feet and goes up to like 200. 12 Newton meters works out to 8.85 pound-feet. If I was to use my bigger one on the lowest setting, I would be over-torquing them. So I'm going to use this one instead, and I'm going to go a little bit higher than the scale shows for 9. Okay, I'm going to go to about 6 Newton meters on the first go here, so I can balance them out a bit. There's 9 Newton meters. Okay, and so now I'm going above the scale of what the torque wrench is rated for, so I'm just going by feel. I'm going to try to go up to 12. Okay, I feel like I'm in the ballpark. Okay, just want to make sure these are all torqued to about 7.5 or 8. They can be 5 to 10 Newton meters. So that's great news. Even though the 30-tooth chainring is 1.5 millimeters further inboard of the 32-tooth chainring, it didn't seem to affect gear changing whatsoever, the indexing, anything. It works just fine. So that's great. No adjustments required. The pedals are supposed to be at least 20 Newton meters. That works out to about 15 pound-feet. So if I use my big torque wrench here, it starts at 10 pound-feet, so I can do 15. And I just want to make sure that they're torqued at least that much. Okay, tightening pedals. Pedal threads are a real brain twister. I'll try to summarize this. The drive side pedal has normal threads, like any other normal screw, clockwise to tighten. Conversely, the non-drive side is the opposite. It's counterclockwise to tighten. However, all of that is when you're looking from the pedal's perspective against the crank arm. If you're using the back hex key opening in order to tighten or loosen, it means that that rule is kind of reversed. So in this case, this is tightening. So clockwise is tightening on the non-drive side. If you're looking at it from the pedal side to the crank arm, that's a reverse thread. To tighten, clockwise here is counterclockwise on the other side. So basically the rule I said about drive side is normal, this side is reversed. If you're doing these Allen key heads or hex key heads on the back of the pedal, you got to flip that again. It's as if you're tightening normally on the non-drive side and tightening opposite to normal on the drive side. Clear as mud. Okay, so we've got at least 20 Newton meters there. So now I've got to reverse the head on my torque wrench. And I'm already beyond 20 Newton meters there, so I'm good to go on my pedals. So the last item from this drivetrain conversion to 1x12 that I need to check is the derailleur bolt. This bolt is supposed to be 8 to 10 Newton meters. Okay, so let's give it a shot and see where this is at. Okay. There we go. It needed a little bit of tightening, but not much. So I was pretty close, maybe just a bit under. So what do I think of this small change from 32 to 32th on the front chainring? I like it overall. I am giving up a little bit on the top end. I can feel it going down hills. I'm definitely in the 11 tooth on the front. I can see where some people wouldn't want to make that trade-off. For me, it's worth it to have the really low gear when I'm on the 50 tooth combined with the 30 on the front. I'll take that for bike packing and for any type of hill climbing that I might do. I can see for some others they might want to stick with the 32 if you don't do a lot of climbing or you're not carrying a lot of gear. It's really a matter of personal taste. For me, I think I'll stick here. I've always got the 32 tooth if I decide I'm going to do a ride or rides that don't require gearing that low. So I will just modify it as I see fit, but for now, this is perfect for me. If you followed along with this whole series, thanks for watching. I have more videos planned. I plan to try to convert these to tubeless. These tires are the giant ones that came with the bike. They're made by Kenda. They're not tubeless ready. The rims are not tubeless ready. So I've purchased some tubeless compatible tires, and I'm going to try and see if I can make these rims work with those tires. Another video I'm planning is to do a review of the Aero front harness that I have on this bike, which I use for bike packing. If you enjoy this type of content and you would like to see these videos, please give this video a like and please subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.